An extinction-level cataclysm occurred on our planet between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. The event was global in its consequences, and it affected mankind profoundly. Because the scientific evidence that proved it happened has only begun to emerge since 2007, and because its implications have not yet been taken into account at all by historians and archaeologists, we are obliged to contemplate the possibility that everything we've been taught about the origins of civilization could be wrong.
It seems like every time I start an episode, I mention that the topic I'm covering is one that I did a good amount of research on and one that really interests me. And that's all true. I wasn't lying.
How many times do I have to say it? I've never
lied in my life.
But let me tell you, this topic really interests me. I've been reading about this for literally years, following all types of new podcasts, articles, whatever and whenever they appear. And I never really thought about creating a video on it. I kind of felt like people would think it's too boring or not a big deal. But my whole life, I've loved history. And the idea that we can look back in time and use the knowledge to shape our future is so badass to me. Hell, when I was a kid, I wanted to be Indiana Jones and be an archaeologist, treasure hunter / Nazi murderer. In school, some people like math, some people like writing, and true alpha giant brain humans like history. It's just a fact. So when you tell me that there's evidence out there that we got our history wrong, how we might have been building true empires thousands of years before we thought, how the Americas had really advanced people hundreds of years before hunter and gatherers, then you bet I'm gonna look into it and make a video about it, buckarino. So here we are. This is a look into the writings and findings of Grant Hancock, Randall Carlson, and numerous other scientists and journalists on the evidence that will force us to rewrite our history. Now, I have to make a mini intro after my intro, just to state the other side of my opinions on everything that I'll cover here.
That's my opinion!
If you know me, or maybe you've seen my videos before, then you might know that I'm pretty skeptical about things. My first thought about any new information I hear is, this is BS. Some people are born skeptics, and I think I was. Being a skeptic is not a bad thing, even though some people think it is. I love reading articles by people like Michael Shermer, a professional skeptic. Wow, what a job. And it's hard for me to believe things without evidence and true historic proof to follow up with it. This is a side of me that definitely was a factor in not making this video. But I feel like I found enough for me to at least compile things together and let you guys check it out. Just like all my other conspiracy, uncloaked videos, it's all for you guys to decide. Okay, let's finally start this video. So I'm sure some of you are like, what the hell is he going on about? Let me give you a quick overview so we can jump in. Our history books will tell us that we have expanded our civilizations from the idea that hunters and gatherers got together, learned to grow agriculture, and thousands of years of rising and falling empires, we finally progressed to where we are today. But what if I told you that archaeologists are uncovering new sites dating back thousands of years before hunter and gatherers supposedly walked the earth? And what if that is true? What happened to the advanced civilizations? What if I told you that geologists are finding evidence that there were cataclysmic events that could have wiped out those ancient people, and we haven't realized it till now? So now let's get into specifics. Okay, Egypt's badass. I mean, if you don't think Egypt is badass, pause the video right now and get out.
Sorry, chef. Yeah, do me a favor. Yes, chef.
Unsubscribe.
I ain't fucking a fan of it. Get out!
Growing up, I was addicted to anything Egypt. I still have the same Egypt books from like the 3rd grade. Egypt is awesome. And a lot of Egyptian history is chalked up as understood. Yep, we get it. We understand. Yeah, there's pharaohs. Yep, it was sandy. It was hot. Pyramids, yada, yada, yada. We don't know how to build them, but whatever. It's all figured out academically. That's until an iconic monument was looked in a little bit more closely.
What is the argument about the Sphinx, the enclosure of the Sphinx? And Dr. Robert Schoch from Boston University, who's a geologist,
Yes.
what was his conclusion?
What Schoch is saying is that the Sphinx and the trench out of which the Sphinx is cut bears the unmistakable evidence of precipitation-induced weathering caused by exposure to a substantial period of heavy rainfall.
In 1989, I had in my mind that the Egyptologists must be correct because they've studied it, they must know what they're doing. I was coming from an academic point of view. I thought, before I got off the plane, that this would be simple, open and shut case. I had no doubt at the time that my colleagues in Egyptology must know what they're talking about, and all of that changed literally within 30 to 120 seconds of first seeing the Sphinx. Yeah, it really did.
What was your first impression?
Because my first impression of the Sphinx was, now that I saw it on the ground, in person, there was something wrong with the Egyptological dating. Because when you look at the Sphinx, as a geologist with a geological eye, this was not weathered by wind and sand. This was not desert erosion and weathering that I saw. If the audience has not been to Egypt, they should realize that when they carved the Sphinx, it's all solid bedrock, only the head initially was above the ground surface. They carved down into the rock to free up the body, what I call the core body of the Sphinx. And it's that core body and the walls of the enclosure that show these ancient weathering, precipitation, erosional features that are incompatible with the last 5,000 years of climatic history on the eastern edge of the Sahara. It's a Sphinx enclosure where you see the rolling, undulating profile, the erosional features that can only be caused by precipitation. The rocks are like a layer cake, so it takes out the softer layers, it recedes the softer layers, some of the harder layers stick out further, but the water also finds its way down crevices and cracks, and it forms these vertical fissures. I want to make the point because a lot of people get confused. They say, couldn't it be rising Nile floods? No. Geologically, that would give a very different signature on the rock. It's not floods coming up from the bottom. It's actually precipitation and rainfall runoff coming from above.
And rainfall for thousands of years?
Well, there's two aspects here. It could be thousands of years. It could be much stronger rainfall, huge flash floods, that type of thing.
And now I never thought about the Sphinx having water erosion because, it's in the desert. But if it's dated back to a time that did have rainfall, that does make sense. There is water erosion on something that could not have water erosion unless it was dating back thousands of years ago when there was rain.
And the problem is we don't have that rainfall in Giza, in Egypt, 4,500 years ago. You have to go back much earlier to get that rainfall.
So your argument is
the pyramids.
not that the whole thing was that much older, was that parts of it seem to have been from an earlier civilization, or
Yes.
at least that civilization far, far earlier than
I would say that the ground plan, what we have at Giza, the basic layout of the site, was established in what the ancient Egyptians called Zep-Tepi, the first time. I and my colleagues suggest that the first time can be dated to the period of about 12,500 to 13,000 years ago.
But we can't just say, okay, the Sphinx has water erosion, so that means we got giant civilizations thousands of years ago. Oh, guys, we got more to look at. Göbeklitepe is super interesting to me. An old boss of mine introduced it to me, and ever since then, I constantly think about it. Imagine a site older than Stonehenge, with insanely complicated carvings and stones that were quarried and moved miles away before the invention of the wheel.
Give me the perspective of how large they believe it is currently, as of current.
What's excavated at the moment is on a scale of Stonehenge. What's under the ground may be as much as 50 times larger.
Jesus.
When you say there used to be a lost advanced civilization before 10,000 years ago.
Well, let's just pause here for a second, because what we know for a fact is that the carbon dating in all the area around Göbeklitepe is somewhere around 12,000 years. Is that correct?
11,600 years ago
Okay,
is
so
the earliest they found so far, but a great deal of Göbeklitepe is still underground.
Right. So at least what we know is someone built some pretty impressive structures 11,600 years ago.
7,000 years before Stonehenge.
So when that story broke, it was controversial in the sense that we thought hunter-gatherers could not do something like this because to do that you need a large population with a division of labor. The response to archaeologists was, well, I guess we were wrong about hunter-gatherers. Maybe they can do more stuff than we gave them credit for. So why is that not a reasonable hypothesis versus it was actually advanced, but we mean something completely different by advanced, not writing and metal and technology. We mean, I don't know what you mean. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, we have a body of archaeology which goes on for decades, which is saying that megalithic sites date to no older than 5,500 to 6,000 years old. Gigantea would push it close to 6,000 years old. And there are no older sites than that. Then along comes Göbekli Tepe, 7,000 years older than Stonehenge. Incredibly sophisticated site. 50 times as much as they've already excavated is still under the ground. That there's hundreds and hundreds of giant stone pillars that they've identified with ground-penetrating radar. By all accounts, we're looking at the largest megalithic site that's ever been created on Earth. And it pops up 11,600 years ago with no obvious background to it. It just comes out of nowhere. Now, to me, that's rather that we know of. But to me, that's immediately a rather puzzling and an interesting situation.
Purposely buried is insane to me. Even the fact that the dig is nowhere near finished and the landscape could be covered in multiple sites gives me chills.
When you look at something like Göbekli Tepe that's covered up purposefully, right?
Yes, deliberately buried. Again, I cite Klaus Schmidt. He's the authority on this. He's the excavator. He absolutely adamantly insists that site was deliberately buried and finally covered with a hill, which is what Göbekli Tepe means in the Turkish language, pot-bellied hill.
So what we need now is evidence of types of catastrophe that would date back to the correct time to wash away these advanced empires. Oh, wait.
In a remote area of northwest Greenland, an international team of scientists has made a stunning discovery. Buried beneath nearly a kilometer of ice, it's an impact crater. 300 meters deep, 31 kilometers wide, much bigger than Washington, D.C., even bigger than Paris, and it's probably one of the youngest large impact craters on Earth.
If the impact happened when Greenland was covered in ice, which is most of the past 2 million years, billions of tons of ice would have vaporized in an instant, leading to an influx of fresh water into the world's oceans.
For a very long time, really until just a couple of years ago, all of the mainstream academics in the fields of archaeology and anthropology were saying there were no human beings in North America before, let's say, 13,000 years ago, give or take 500 years. And they came across the Bering Land Bridge. The Bering Strait at that time was above water, sea level was lower. They entered the Americas then. They weren't hit there before. Now, in the last 2 to 3 years, there's just been a whole raft of new scientific research, and no scientist today is prepared to defend the Clovis model anymore.
The Earth is pockmarked with scars, and each of these scars represents a tremendously powerful catastrophe that's happened in the history of the Earth. Now, that's accepted by mainstream science, that major catastrophes have happened in the history of the Earth. But where this thing now is about to come full circle is the recognition that these kinds of catastrophes have also influenced the rise and fall of civilization. Okay, so what we're seeing there is a delta. And then in front of it, we're seeing rippled landscape.
Rippled landscape that looks exactly like the beach looks.
This is the whole mystery of this, that this happens at a scale of inches on beaches and a scale of hundreds of feet here.
Good Lord.
Now, right here in the middle, you see a massive delta.
Yes.
Spewed out like a big tongue, splayed out. And then right down here, you start seeing the ripples. And there's a farmhouse. You see the farmhouse there? Now, those ripples are, the tallest ones are about the height of a 5-story building.
Whoa.
Here, what you have to visualize is a tsunami sweeping over the land that's over 1,000 feet deep. That's what happened here. Okay,
Holy shit.
Look at that.
This is crazy. As close, for a dummy like me, to look at something like that and then go, oh, fucking, yeah, that's definitely a river. A river carved that.
Okay, what you're looking at there is a gigantic, extinct set of cataracts, like you would find at Niagara Falls, but to use Graham's term, writ large.
Ooh.
Okay, and the landscape opens up. So you're on that rock blade.
We're on the rock blade right
Okay,
there.
that's
So
what-
now you can begin to see the scale of this thing that we were just seeing from Google Earth.
Well, now when you describe it, I mean, I would have just looked at it and go, wow, that's kind of cool looking. I would have never have thought, that was obviously created by water pouring through.
That's the problem, is because we haven't had the scale of perception. Here we have the modern Snake River flowing in the modern channel, and then we have the ancient flood channel, and which you can see there, the average annual discharge of the Snake, 56,900 cubic feet. But the estimated flood that created the big channel is 40 million cubic feet. So this whole feature is 3 miles long, and the ripples here are on the same scale as the Camas Prairie ripples that we just looked at. So again, as we begin to place these event nodes around on the map, we can begin to see the outlines of a really, really huge event. And all of this is going on at the same time. You've got to understand.
All this is dated to the same time. All this is dated to the same time that you think the impact took place, and it's all over that coast.
See, I think you have to understand this in two phases, because the impact phase is going to melt a whole lot of ice all of a sudden, but it's not going to melt all of it. It's going to leave a huge amount of residual ice in the aftermath. Now, what we see is that particularly after the 11,600 year ago event, at that point, the whole planet comes right out of the Ice Age, inexplicably.
That's the end of the Ice Age.
That's the end of the
It's
Ice
over.
Age, the beginning of the Holocene. It's over. The whole climate of the Earth has been completely altered. The whole balance of nature has been completely altered from before these events to after these events.
This is where the idiots join the chat and say, oh, see, that's Noah's flood. It's proving the Bible. Let's get this out of the way real quick. Graham and Randall are not at all talking about this as evidence and proof of the flood. They are actually openly against it. They are stating multiple floods due to ice caps melting at insane speeds. One way to easily disprove Noah's world flood is...
Mr. Ham and his followers have this remarkable view of a worldwide flood that somehow influenced everything that we observe in nature. A 500-foot wooden boat, 8 zookeepers for 14,000 individual animals, every land plant in the world underwater for a full year. I ask us all, is that really reasonable? You'll hear a lot about the Grand Canyon, I imagine, also, which is a remarkable place, and it has fossils. And the fossils in the Grand Canyon are found in layers. There is not a single place in the Grand Canyon where the fossils of one type of animal cross over into the fossils of another. In other words, when there was a big flood on the earth, you would expect drowning animals to swim up to a higher level. Not any one of them did. Not a single one. If you could find evidence of that, my friends, you could change the world. One of the extraordinary claims associated with Mr. Ham's worldview is that this giant boat, very large wooden ship, went aground safely on a mountain in the Middle East, what we now call the Middle East. And so places like Australia are populated then by animals who somehow managed to get from the Middle East all the way to Australia in the last 4,000 years. Now that to me is an extraordinary claim. We would expect then, somewhere between the Middle East and Australia, we would expect to find evidence of kangaroos. We would expect to find some fossils, some bones. In the last 4,000 years, somebody would have been hopping along there and died along the way, and we'd find them. And furthermore, there's a claim that there was a land bridge that allowed these animals to get from Asia all the way to the continent of Australia, and that land bridge has disappeared in the last 4,000 years. No navigator, no diver, no U.S. Navy submarine, no one's ever detected any evidence of this, let alone any fossils of kangaroos.
And if you're the ones that say, the flood wasn't worldwide, it was a metaphor, then why are some things metaphors and other things strictly by the word of, you know what, let's just move on. I don't take everything Graham Hancock says to be 100% factual, and he doesn't expect us to. He is a reporter. He is not a scientist. He's had ideas in the past that turned out to be wrong, but he never introduced true scientists and geologists who have no motive to make things up until now. When we learn about history, we expect the story to be finished. We expect our historians to understand it all. So the idea of new evidence coming out and changing the norm gets killed at the start because it can't be true. We know everything about history. It's one thing to be skeptical, but another to not open your mind at all. That's what piqued my interest in all of this. People looking the other way to actual scientific evidence. We think the chances of our civilization being wiped out by natural disasters is so small, but what if it happened to us before? Maybe we should pay more attention now. And I'm really curious on what your guys' idea is on this. Have you heard about any of this? Will you look into these guys after seeing this? I would love to know. Thank you for you guys' patience between the videos. And if you have a topic for me to cover, leave it down below in the comments. Thanks again, guys, and I'll see you guys in the next one.